In this episode, we're going to zoom in on a part of M&A work that causes a lot of pain when it's skipped, validating what the organization is actually allowed to do with data under existing contracts and data sharing arrangements. Mergers and divestitures change relationships fast. Suddenly, two companies want to share data that used to be separate, or one company is splitting and needs to keep certain data while handing other data to the new entity. The business may treat this as common sense. Like, of course, we can share the customer list with our new parent company, or of course, we can keep using the same vendors during a transition. Privacy management can't operate on common sense here, because legal and contractual obligations can be very specific, and violating them can create regulatory exposure, lawsuits, customer trust damage, and expensive remediation. The goal today is to understand how to validate contractual and data sharing obligations in a practical way, including what to look for in agreements, how to spot hidden restrictions, and how to manage transition periods without accidentally turning necessary business continuity into unauthorized data use. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at CIPM in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A useful starting point is to clarify what we mean by obligations in this context. Contractual obligations include terms in customer contracts, vendor contracts, partnership agreements, and internal policies that are incorporated by reference. Data sharing obligations include commitments about who data can be shared with, what purposes are allowed, what safeguards must be used, and what notice or consent is required. During a merger, the key question is whether the acquisition changes who counts as an authorized recipient. During a divestiture, the key question is whether the separated entity is still authorized to access data that used to be shared internally. These questions matter because many agreements were written for a world where the organizations were separate, and they often include restrictions on onward disclosure, confidentiality, and use limitation. Privacy management's job is to ensure that the excitement and urgency of corporate change does not cause the organization to treat data as a transferable asset without checking the terms that govern it. In other words, you validate permission before you move or share. When validating obligations, one of the first places to look is customer-facing commitments, because those define expectations and can limit what you can do even if you technically own the company. Customers may have contracts that restrict sharing of their data with affiliates, subcontractors, or new parties without notice or consent. Some contracts permit sharing with affiliates for service delivery, while others require explicit permission for any sharing beyond the specific contracted purpose. Some contracts include confidentiality clauses that treat customer data as confidential information that cannot be disclosed to third parties, and an acquiring company may be considered a third party until the transaction is complete. Even privacy notices can create commitments about sharing, especially if they promise not to share data except in specific situations. So validation means reading the relevant clauses and translating them into operational decisions. Can we share data now? Must we wait until closing? Must we notify? Must we obtain consent? Or must we keep datasets separate? This is where privacy management helps deal teams avoid assumptions that lead to accidental breach of contract. Vendor contracts and third-party agreements also matter because they can restrict what happens to data when ownership changes. Some vendor agreements limit processing to a specific customer entity, and a new parent company may not be covered. Some agreements require the vendor to be notified of a change of control, and sometimes they give the vendor rights to terminate or renegotiate. Some agreements restrict subcontracting or require approval for new subprocessors, which becomes relevant when the combined organization wants to consolidate vendors or move services. Another common issue is data location and transfer constraints embedded in vendor contracts, such as commitments that data will be hosted in certain regions. If the acquiring company expects to shift everything to its own global platform, those commitments can conflict with the integration plan. Validation here means identifying which vendor contracts are tied to the target entity, what change of control terms exist, and whether the planned migration or consolidation would breach existing obligations. This is not about being cautious for its own sake. It is about preventing an integration plan from collapsing because the legal and contractual foundation was not checked. Partnership and data sharing agreements can be especially tricky because they often involve ongoing exchanges of data that are based on specific purposes. A target company might share data with a partner for joint marketing, fraud prevention, or service delivery, and the agreement might limit use, retention, and onward sharing. After a merger, the acquiring company might want to use that shared data for broader analytics or combine it with its own datasets. If the agreement prohibits that, then the combined organization must maintain separation or renegotiate terms. During a divestiture, the reverse problem appears. The divested entity may have relied on shared services or data from the parent company, and after separation it may no longer be authorized to access that data. Transition service agreements may allow temporary sharing, but those agreements must be specific about scope, purpose, security, and deletion. Privacy management should therefore treat partner agreements as live privacy constraints, not as business paperwork. These agreements often contain the strictest purpose limits because partners are sensitive about data leakage and competitive advantage. A beginner-friendly way to validate obligations is to think in terms of 4 checks: who, what, why, and how. Who asks whether the receiving party is allowed, which becomes complicated in M&A because organizational boundaries change. What asks what data is covered, because some agreements cover all data while others cover specific categories. Why asks what purposes are permitted, and whether the post-deal plan stays within those purposes or creates a new purpose. How asks what safeguards are required, such as encryption, access restrictions, audit rights, breach notification timelines, or data residency commitments. If any of these are unclear, you treat it as a risk and you pause the sharing decision until it is clarified. This method keeps validation practical because it translates contract language into decisions that engineers and business owners can follow. It also creates a record of reasoning, which is valuable if questions arise later from auditors, regulators, or customers. Divestitures introduce a unique set of problems because separation often requires disentangling systems and datasets that were never designed to be separated. For example, a shared customer database might serve multiple business units, and a divestiture may require transferring the relevant customer records to the new entity while ensuring the original entity no longer accesses them. That creates obligations around lawful transfer, minimization, and secure deletion. There may also be obligations to notify individuals about changes in controller identity and contact points, depending on context. Another issue is shared vendor accounts and shared cloud environments, where access controls must be redesigned so the separated entities cannot see each other's data. During transition periods, temporary sharing might be necessary for operations, but it must be controlled by transition agreements that define purpose, access, and timelines. Validation in divestitures is therefore not a one-time contract review. It is an ongoing coordination between legal terms and technical separation steps, because the risks evolve as systems are split. A big source of error in both mergers and divestitures is treating internal sharing as automatically allowed once a corporate relationship exists. In practice, contracts and notices may have been written with a specific entity in mind, and some data may have been collected under constraints that do not automatically expand to affiliates. Even when affiliate sharing is allowed, it may be limited to specific purposes, like providing services, and may not cover new uses like cross-company profiling or monetization. This is where privacy management needs to push for clarity. What is the intended post-deal use, and does the existing permission cover it? If it does not, the organization may need updated notices, new consent mechanisms, revised contracts, or a plan to keep certain datasets separate. The idea is not to block integration, but to integrate lawfully and predictably. Integration that ignores obligations is fast at first and costly later because it leads to rework, incident response, and reputation damage. Another important validation step is checking how obligations apply to derived data and analytics outputs. Many agreements focus on raw data, but the combined organization may create new datasets through combining, profiling, or modeling. If those derived datasets can still identify individuals or be linked back to them, they are often still personal data and still subject to obligations. Agreements might restrict creating profiles, limit marketing uses, or require deletion after certain periods. During a merger, teams may assume they can freely analyze the combined dataset, but those assumptions can violate purpose limits or transparency commitments. During a divestiture, derived datasets might embed both entities' information, making separation difficult. So privacy management should ask whether analytics outputs will be shared, whether they can be de-identified, and how retention rules apply to them. This is an operational detail that becomes a legal issue quickly if ignored. To manage validation effectively, privacy management should aim to produce clear, actionable decisions that deal and integration teams can follow. That might mean defining which datasets can be shared immediately, which must wait until closing, which require notice or consent, and which must remain separated. It might mean identifying key contracts that require change of control notices, renegotiation, or vendor approval before migration. It might mean defining the rules for transition service agreements, like limiting access to only what is needed for continuity, logging access, and setting deletion timelines when the transition ends. The most important thing is that these decisions are documented and communicated, because confusion during integration is a risk multiplier. When teams are unsure, they make their own decisions, and that leads to inconsistent handling and accidental violations. A privacy manager's role is to create a shared understanding that turns complex obligations into simple operating rules. As we close, validating contractual and data sharing obligations during mergers and divestitures is about respecting the permissions and promises that already exist while planning for the new reality. You examine customer commitments, vendor contracts, and partnership agreements to determine who is allowed to receive data, what data is covered, what purposes are permitted, and what safeguards are required. You pay special attention to change of control terms, affiliate sharing limits, data residency commitments, and onward sharing restrictions, because those are common sources of surprises. You recognize that divestitures are particularly risky because separation can break assumptions about internal access and shared systems, making controlled transition agreements essential. And you remember that derived data and analytics can still be governed by the same obligations if it remains linkable to individuals. When privacy management validates these constraints early and translates them into clear operational rules, it prevents integration speed from turning into unauthorized sharing, and it helps the organization change shape without breaking its privacy responsibilities.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit DailyCyber.News.